I want to thank everyone for watching the videos in our virtual town hall. I have with me here Bob Gibson, who is a candidate for our party's nomination for the 56th State House District, which is here in Fayette County, but also part of Woodford and Franklin counties as well. Bob, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Clint. And first, I want to thank you and the entire Fayette County Democratic Party for hosting this video town hall. It's real important that we're able to do this, especially under the current circumstances. And I also want to thank all the residents of the 56th district who are able to watch this.
Thank you so much. We're happy to have candidates here. We know during this time of staying healthy at home, it's hard for candidates to get out there and meet the voters that they in the ways they traditionally would have. And so we were hoping that this will be a way to get the candidates out in front of those folks before they make their decision for the primary. One of the things that we often hear from voters is they love getting to know candidates on a personal level. So our first two questions are going to be related to both the coronavirus and you as an individual and as a person. And the first one we have is, during this time of staying healthy at home, are there any television shows that you're binging on? Are there any books that you're reading that you would like to recommend to voters?
Yeah, there are. There's a couple of books that I'd like to recommend to people who haven't read them, as well as give you a little synopsis of them. First is Howard Zinn's You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train. That is his autobiography, and of course, he's the author of A People's History of the United States, which I also used as a supplemental text in my U.S. history classes years ago. But the premise of the book, and it is what is always set with me, is you've got to take a side on issues, regardless of what the challenge is, regardless of what the issue is. He taught, take a side, because if you don't take a side, you're being complicit in whatever action is being taken by whoever the leaders are at that time. And so I would use portions of that in my classroom to try to instill that spirit in my former students back in the day as well. The second book is John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman. This was a scary book for me. I read it many, many years ago, and it's all about large corporations in America exploiting third world nations around the world, especially in South and Central America, if those countries happen to have some natural resources. And that what they would do is they would loan hundreds of millions of dollars to the countries in order to then get the contracts to build electrical grids or water systems, only to hope the country would default on their loans instead of paying it back, so that they could then take over their natural resources and exploit the country that way. John Perkins was one of those hitmen, economic hitmen, and of course he obviously felt bad about that later on and wrote a few books about it.
Thank you for those recommendations. The other question we have that's healthy at home related is, we've all had a little extra time for some introspection. Is there anything you've learned about yourself during this time that you would like to share?
One is how many things that we take for granted that we're used to having in everyday society. And so some of those things is I've learned the importance of social gatherings, of going to the movies with my parents. My mother actually even mentioned that to me the other day, that we haven't been able to do that in a long time. Of attending sporting events with my friends and my stepson, Parker. Also of just going out to eat dinner with my wife. All of these things have been vastly either changed or eliminated. And so it's sad, but hopefully soon we're able to move forward with that in a healthy way, obviously. And so what I've learned ultimately is how much we all need to interact in society and with others.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to jump into the policy questions now. And what we've done is we've asked Democrats in Lexington over the last several weeks to submit questions to us that they think are important for the various candidates. We've narrowed those down to about 7 questions for the State House candidates. The first couple are a little COVID-19 related, then we'll get into more issues oriented with the General Assembly, and then we'll talk a little bit about some community building issues After we're done with those, we'll just open it up for you to share any information on yourself while you're running, how people can get involved with your campaign. So I'll go ahead and jump into the first question. COVID-19 has changed and will continue to change several aspects of our everyday lives. And we're hearing from folks that that's exposing to them the great income inequality in our Commonwealth. Moving forward, what should our leaders be doing to address the issue of income inequality?
Well, there's a couple things that stand out to me. The first is this pandemic has highlighted the flaws in our mostly employer-based health insurance system in regards to properly covering all the individuals impacted by this or any other health concerns. And it's also even more so highlighted because I think that's one that many of us had already kind of put on our radar. But the one I've seen the biggest change also is how fragile the current healthcare industry is for needed supplies and things in a pandemic because they're not propped up by a system like a single payer system or some other type of system where there could be some money flowing focused on emergency pandemic type needs. So that's the healthcare side of things. Now, on the other side, I have seen firsthand how this is displayed, how many families rely on school meals to properly nourish their children. As a public school educator, I've certainly seen this, and our county in particular has supplied thousands upon thousands of meals. This is an unfortunate but true reality and a challenge that we need to try to work on here in the Commonwealth. As far as moving forward, I think we need to examine the value of a single payer healthcare system for payment of healthcare costs for everyone's needs, and possibly review the positive impact that providing a basic universal income could have on individuals, because we would raise that poverty line to such a level that we could survive through pandemics like this.
You've already touched on the weakness in our employer-based healthcare system, which is our second question, but if you'll flesh out for me a little bit of what Kentucky can do to ensure that our citizens have good and affordable healthcare or access to healthcare.
And you're right, because I did kind of cover some things in the next question with a single payer system. And of course, the single payer system is more on a federal level than a state level. But I do know in Canada in particular, that started at a province level. And once they were able to do it in that province, which is the equivalent of our states, then they started to realize across Canada that would work. So maybe Kentucky needs to be the trendsetter for this and find a way to make that work for our system. What I would like to do if we set up a system like that is to find a way to take the parameters of the current Medicare system, start lowering the age that you qualify for that, and do it in increments of ages and time, so that you slowly build yourself up into it to go from the oldest to the next level of old to the next level of middle-aged people and on down. And hopefully over a period of time, you're able to have everybody included in that system, because it certainly would take some time to build up the budget power to allow a single-payer system to work, whether that's here in Kentucky as a state or whether that's on the federal level.
Speaking of budget power, it seems like any idea moving forward will have to have revenue, and every year, particularly every budget year, we hear the General Assembly talking about budget cuts. What sources of revenue or new sources of revenue would you support for supporting a fully funded budget?
There's a few areas there. One would be legalizing medicinal marijuana and taxing that with a fee. I look at that as a win in three areas. One, it's a win for farmers because you're increasing a new cash crop that could be grown here in Kentucky. Two, you're helping medical patients that are in pain and need the medication for their ailments. And then thirdly, you got an opportunity to raise revenue for the state of Kentucky. So to me, that's a three-win opportunity with medicinal marijuana. Legalizing sports gambling is another area that we could tax or assign fees to. The bottom line, we have millions of dollars a year being spent by Kentuckians already, either illegally or sending it over to other states due to the gambling that they happen to do. And so if we legalize that here in Kentucky, we could then obviously gain some revenue from that and keep those monies in the state of Kentucky. And the last thing I'd like to do is look at modernizing the tax code to possibly include almost like a sales tax on some services. Currently, there are several services, and I'm open to look at several different services. Some I might agree that we ought to tax, some probably not. But looking at maybe expanding some services that could be taxed similar that we do right now for businesses that make a widget, there's a sales tax involved. So look at service taxes, and finally, possibly including a wealth tax in Kentucky. People who are super wealthy in this state, God bless them, good for them. They've done a great job finding a way to get there, but they've done that usually, unless they've inherited a lot of money, they've usually done that with the help of lots of other Kentuckians and systems and services in Kentucky. So it's their way, in my opinion, that they could give back.
Good. Thank you for sharing those. Our next question talks a little bit about budget priorities. The two parties in Frankfort seem to have very different legislative priorities. Much of this stems, we think, from a philosophical differences about the role government should be playing in people's lives. Our voters want to hear, if you're elected on day one, what will be your legislative priorities?
Well, I've got several. We won't expound upon it too long, but there are several. Number one is public education. I have direct experience in seeing the negative impact on lack of budgets in certain areas for properly educating children. Obviously, our budgets are going to be impacted by the current pandemic, and so I do worry desperately on what may happen with our budgets next year. So properly funding public education to ensure all students receive a quality education. That's number one. Number two, public employee pensions. I believe that our government has the responsibility to ensure that our public employees receive the benefits that they have earned and were promised. Very simply, firemen, policemen and women, state workers, county workers, city workers, as well as educators, all deserve the benefits that they're deserved, as well as better wages. And so I would certainly be an advocate for public employee wage increases and pensions. Another is wage increases, increased wages and increased economic activity. We need to create a living wage in Kentucky, if not in the country, and at least do it here, as all work has dignity. It doesn't matter what you do for a living. We all are dignified in that work, and we all deserve a living wage. And the other piece to that is, if you increase everybody's wages to a living wage, that puts more money in the economic system. And so then businesses are going to benefit from this as well because of an increased economic activity. Another area of priority for me is diversity. It is time to address the long-standing racial inequalities in our system so that persons of color have easy and affordable access to healthy foods and medical services. Unfortunately, this pandemic has highlighted that even more in this state as well as in several other states. And so it is time that we tackle one of the founding problems with this entire country hundreds of years ago. And then finally, civility. My hat's off to Governor Andy Beshear and the civility that he's brought to the governorship and how he's working across the aisle with anybody and everybody to help with not only this pandemic, but any legislation or anything that would be better for Kentucky. So I want to help continue that civil discourse just the same as I did in my classroom years ago. We must work together to solve the challenges Kentucky faces.
Thank you for that. Our next question is sort of where politics and policy collide. And it's in a very interesting way. Every 10 years, as hopefully everyone that's watching knows, that we conduct the census. So if you're watching this and you haven't filled out your census form yet, please finish this video and go do that. But that means over the next couple of years, the General Assembly will be redrawing the legislative district boundaries. Describe for us what you think the process should be, and tell us how you would work to ensure that district lines are fair and that minority communities and voices aren't shut out.
Well, first, I got to admit, the 56th district has been awful good to Democrats for a long time. So I got to put that on the table first. That doesn't have anything to do with my stance or guidelines here, but we do have to admit that being the case, and hopefully that will continue in the future. Now, putting that aside, the nonpartisan or a nonpartisan independent commission needs to be formed and established in order to review the different boundaries and set some boundary guidelines that are based on something other than politics. Now, let me explain where I'm going with that. For example, I would like to see something where you start with whole counties first, okay? Because obviously that group of people have chosen to live together, whether they're diverse or not. Hopefully they are diverse, but you start there, and then for larger counties, obviously you're going to have to add, like Fayette County, you're going to have to add additional districts. But for counties like Woodford, you may only have to add one other additional county in order to get the population needed to fit the guidelines from state regulations. So I would start at the counties and then go to an adjacent county and see if two counties might be able to make up the population. Now, let's say two counties don't by themselves. Then when you do start to go inside of other counties, or let's say a third county's border, you do so in some sort of sophisticated shape instead of arbitrary lines until you get the population needed to meet the regulations. The key is for voters to choose their politicians instead of politicians choosing their voters. And that's the biggest piece of the stance that I have. And finally, I do know of the Kentucky Fair Maps group that has been meeting and working on similar ideas, just like I just presented. And our current representative, Joe Gravis, has been a part of that. And I would like to see their work and any ideas I may have or others have go into that work.
Great, thank you. So our final two questions are community related. How will you work as both our nominee and as a member of the State House to engage young voters in the conversations about the issues that face Kentucky?
Well, Clint, this is a real easy one for me. I've spent 26 years working with young individuals. And then on top of that, my entire core campaign team is all 31 years of age or younger. Why is that? Well, one of my co-chairs of the campaign is a former student of mine, and he called me as soon as this seat became open and said, I know that you've been interested in running for a seat at some point down the road. Now's the time. He called. We had such a relationship from all those years ago. He felt comfortable enough to call me. He knew that I might have an interest in doing it. And then obviously he supports me in that run by making the call. So having young people around me and getting their viewpoint, their input, their feedback is vital to me in moving forward, because the thing that I've learned after all these years of working with young people is they have very unique, different, and good ideas, and they're so often different than people my age. I'm turning 50 here in the end of this month, but I've got 31-year-old and younger working closely with me because I value their feedback and want to implement their ideas into the future, because the future of Kentucky is with them. It's not going to be with me for too much longer.
And so our final question, if elected, what will you do to improve civic competency in Kentucky?
This is another one that falls right in my wheelhouse. My classroom was all about this entire conversation. I purposely, daily brought up controversial issues in history, in politics, everywhere I could, economics for that matter, so that we could argue positively in my class. And I thoroughly encourage kids from all viewpoints to voice their concerns about whatever the topic is that's on the table. Make sure you do that from a factual basis. Make sure the people across the room from you that completely disagree with you, and I wanted kids all over the room to disagree with themselves, including with me. But we want to hear those viewpoints, and we want them to be able to defend those viewpoints. And that level of civic competency is needed in Kentucky so that people can have educated conversations about all the controversial issues and topics that are on the table, which will ultimately lead us all, hopefully, to a bipartisan agreement for whatever legislation that would be positive for Kentucky.
Great. So those are all the questions that we have. So I want to open it up to you now to talk about for the next couple of minutes. Anything that you think voters should know about you, about your campaign, how to engage. The floor is just kind of open. So,
all right, a couple of things here. First, up until the COVID-19 pandemic, I had enjoyed for the last year attending and learning from the city council meetings in Midway and Versailles, as well as the Woodford County Fiscal Court meetings and the Franklin County Fiscal Court meetings. That experience and that knowledge of local issues has been very important to me in framing kind of my campaign. Also, I've enjoyed talking with neighborhood associations in Lexington, visiting with them and hearing from residents there, as well as learning from a Lexington city council member. All those viewpoints and ideas have been important to me. I'd also like the viewers out there to visit my website at gibson4ky.com. You'll learn a little bit more about me there. You'll see some different issues and things, most of which you've heard here, so that won't expand too much more. But I have contact information there if you want to help the campaign, if you want to donate to the campaign, if you want to join in any way, feel free to contact me directly through that website. I'm also a proud 26-year educator as a teacher and an administrator. I am a lifelong resident of the 56th district and have enjoyed the representation that I've received from the last 5 or 6 reps, all of which I know. I am a former, this is the one that catches people off guard, I'm a former 2-term chairperson of the Woodford County Chamber of Commerce. And so I do look at things from a business point of view. I tend to err towards individuals, people, and workers, but do I want businesses, and especially small businesses, to thrive? Absolutely, I do. And I'm also a proud lifelong Democrat. Finally, I want to thank you, Clint. I want to thank the Fayette County Democratic Party for this invitation to the forum, and especially for the hard work all of you all did in getting Governor Beshear elected. Your hard work and the margin in Fayette County was a huge reason why he was able to win. I also want to thank you for allowing me to speak at your in-person meeting a few months ago. That was a great experience for me, and it helped prepare me for today, as well as hopefully future endeavors within running for office. And what I saw that day was the passion that you all have, as well as the passion in the room from the other candidates that spoke, and that inspired me.
Well, thank you for that. We appreciate those kind words, and we appreciate you taking some time out of your day today. I know our voters will appreciate being able to hear from the candidates as well. Everyone that's watching, I want to remind you that the primary is June 23rd. We'll be posting information on our website about how to access absentee ballot so that you can vote by mail in a safe way, and we're hoping that will help turn out a little bit. So, Bob, again, thank you so much. I'll let you get back to the rest of your day, and have a good one.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks.